Hello. How are you? Excuse me. How are you all doing tonight? Good. What? I didn't hear anybody say. You doing good? Good evening. Y'all staring back at me. There's no conversation going on here. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started this evening with our first song. Oh, say, but I'm glad. You got to smile at me while we do this song, or I won't allow it. I won't allow it. You're gonna have to do it again if you don't smile. Right? Just stand up. Let's go. Hope you all are doing good and had a good Wednesday. Let's sing together. There is a song in my heart today, something I never had. Jesus has taken my sins away. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad, I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Jesus has come and my cup's overrun. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Wonderful, marvelous love He brings into a heart that's sad. Through darkest tunnels His soul just sings. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad, I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Jesus has come and my cup's overrun. Oh, say, but I'm glad. All right, so hang on here for a second. My mom texted me something today, and I thought I'd share it with you guys while we're thinking about this song. She said, well, she's reading a devotional book or something, and she texted me this. Regardless of what we long for, satisfaction apart from Jesus Christ does not exist. And we are the happy people. We are the glad people because we know the end of life. We know what's going on, and we know we have a certain hope and a certain future, and a joyous future to look forward to, regardless of the circumstances or the things in life that bring us down and discourage us and depress us. Living for Christ is the answer to your search for joy and happiness in life. So let's sing on that third verse now. Won't you come to Him with all your care, weary and worn and sad? You too will sing as His love you share. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad, I'm glad. Oh, say, but I'm glad. Jesus has come and my cup's overrun. Oh, say, but I'm glad. All right, you can be seated. We'll move on to our next song for tonight. You can be seated. Saved by the blood. Saved by the blood of the crucified one, now ransomed from sin and a new work begun. Sing praise to the Father and praise to the Son. Saved by the blood of the crucified one. Glory, I'm saved, my sins are all cleanses us from all sin. Next, we'll sing out, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Come Thou Fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing Thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, offer songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount thine fixed upon it, mount of thine redeeming love. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus, softly wed a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let that grace now like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Thank you, Mr. Jason. Don't you just love when you get a different hymnal? The one that we use up there is different, obviously, than the one we all know. And they change the words. Drives me nuts. If you guys didn't know that it changed the...
Why would you change the words we know and not change the Ebenezer?
I don't know. I know it. It's exactly right. Yeah, so I'm glad they didn't change the Ebenezer. That's a nice biblical term, and I like it. But anyway, good to have you all. Good to have the college students in with us. Pastor Brett's little one, Beckham, is back in the hospital this evening. He's at the ER anyway. So they're just having breathing issues yet again, so they're going to hopefully do a breathing treatment. That may be him giving me an update. Let's see if it is. I don't know. But they're doing a breathing treatment. Hopefully it is viral. This is. Just got the breathing treatment, now waiting while they monitor him. So assuming it's viral and breathing treatment does what it's supposed to, they're going to go ahead and send him on home. But anyway, just pray for them. There's Brett's friend, those of you who might remember, Kevin Risma's been here several times with the soccer team. He's about this tall, got a smile as big as Alabama. It's just, anyway, so he's getting married, and so Brett's trying to go down there for that. And so they're supposed to go down there this weekend. We'll see if they can make it. So that's the prayer. If you would just pray for them to do that. And then Ed Gannon texted me just a little bit ago. They are, Brenda does not have the major thing, whatever that was, something with her lungs, so that was a real praise. And she's been cleared to go on that cruise that they're headed out to. But he says, I took a fall today. Please pray for me. We have a long trip starting tomorrow, so we'd appreciate it. So if you'd pray for Ed Gannon, I know that they would appreciate that as well, as he's recovering from that. And then Mike Rogers, Mike and Trafina. Mike had his other hip replacement this week, so that was on Monday. Is that Monday? And he's doing okay, in a lot of pain, but just pray for them. I'll pray, and then I'm going to hand it over to Captain Bly. He's taking it from here for the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to, as we continue our study of these current events and looking at them through the lens of the Scripture. Father, we love you. We thank you for your blessings. We ask that you would just be with Brother Mike and help his pain levels to be down and heal him up quickly. Be with Brother Ed, help him not to have heard anything badly as they get ready to take their trip, and watch over them. Be with little Beckham, strengthen his body as the doctors are working there to figure out just what's going on with his breathing. This is the second time he's been in the hospital with this. Pray that you just watch over them and be with Mom and Dad as they're having to deal with those things. Be with the Maranatha group as they're leaving out here tomorrow to go to school, and just bless our time here together, the teenagers and Awana as they're meet in other parts of the building, and we'll thank and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. If you notice the big bus, the Maranatha bus is out there. That's because they're meeting here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Kids who have signed up, or they meet here from Indianapolis, and they take them up to visit the college. So anyway, that's what they're doing here. That bus won't be there when you leave here. There's 3 buses involved, and one of them had a radiator that went out, and the only place they could find that had the radiator for this bus is in Louisville. And it's a huge piece of equipment, I guess, the radiator, so they need to take this bus to pick up the part. So he's going tonight to Louisville, get the part, and coming back tonight with the part for the other bus. So anyway, I'm just telling you what's going on. So that's what's happening there. This morning I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and mention it. Last week we talked about blessing and cursing Israel. And I wanted to kind of clarify something. In the Old Testament, when a prophet would point out Israel's sin, that is not cursing Israel. Do you understand? It's not a curse, to be honest. It's speaking the truth in love. Cursing Israel is something similar to what one of our Congress people did this last week, or at least they got censured for it, when you are literally calling for the eradication of the Jewish people. That would be cursing Israel. And there's a blessing that comes with blessing Israel that's an eternal promise from God, and there's a curse that comes from cursing Israel that's an eternal promise from God. My representative from the city of Indianapolis is Andre Carson, our church's area representative, is supporting that congressperson, so, Brother Captain Bly's going to point out to us we don't need to worry, and I would agree with him. We don't worry, but I tell you, you know what it does? It puts us right in the crosshairs of God's judgment. When a people are standing cursing Israel, God's made a promise. I will curse those who curse you. And God's curses are much harsher than our own, so just something we need to be praying for. But don't worry. Captain Bly, come on.
Well, as Pastor mentioned, Representative Tlaib from Michigan. I was looking at a few things this afternoon, just out of curiosity more than anything. And one of the things that I noticed, most of the time when you see a representative's name, you see in parentheses D or R, and then you see a location for them. And what I found somewhat stunning was that it's D-Ramallah. Ramallah, Michigan. Now, does the word Ramallah mean anything to anybody? It's not in the United States. It has nothing to do with our history. It has nothing to do with anything that's ours. She's the only, and she said on the floor, Palestinian in Congress. We're going to get to the misrepresentation of facts this evening as it relates to the word Palestine. But next week, I'm hoping that there's an article here in World Magazine, and it's one of the few magazines that I still get because it's worth reading. And the title of the article is Out for Blood, and it's basically got a 4-page timeline and several other things in it. I contacted the editor and asked if we could make copies of it, and so over the course of the next week, we're going to get it copied so that you've got some copies of it. It's worth looking at, and it's worth having the timeline because it goes back to 1914 and the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration has a lot of historical information that's connected to what we're going to be dealing with. More specifically tonight, we're going to deal with Israel and current events, but as is almost always the case whenever we study a subject, if we don't get our biblical history right, and if we don't get our theology right and our knowledge of the Bible right, we're going to come up with wrong conclusions and we're going to have different responses to what's going on. But what I want to do this evening is to start with a current events question, because this is critical. If we don't know what's going on in the who's who in the mix of things, we're probably not going to understand what's really going on. So, does anybody know who Chuck Schumer is? Okay, the chuckles and the smiles tell me that you know something about the man. Okay, well, he's the U.S. Senate Majority Leader, right? Now, okay, that's fine. What does that really mean? That means he's the head of the Democrats, which is the next bullet, and actually two bullets. It did this morning, and they guaranteed me that it wasn't going to do that this evening, but all right. So he's the Senate Majority Leader. He's a Democrat, but here's the key piece. He is a Jew. And so I ask you this question. Why is this important? Why is a Jew, Chuck Schumer, who is the U.S. Senate Majority Leader, supporting aid to Hamas? Why is a Jew supporting aid to Hamas, which has dedicated itself toward eradicating Israel from the sea to the river? I mean, have you heard the sea to the river statement that's been being made, both in Congress and in the news, etc.? You have to ask yourself the question, what on earth is going on in this country and around the world if Jews are supporting Hamas, which is a terror/guerrilla group of Islam that's supported by Iran, Qatar, Iraq, Iran, etc. And so this is the confusion that we're facing, is that this is the nature of the beast that we're looking at, okay, when we're trying to understand this. And as we kind of expand our understanding of this, and we just move it past Chuck Schumer and Tlaib, I would expect, because she is a Muslim, even though she doesn't wear the hijab or anything else, but she is nevertheless a Muslim. And we ask a couple of statistical questions. Why do 1 in 10 Jews in the United States today support Hamas? Now, when you start to grasp a hold of this, this really tells you something about the nature of Jews, but also this is in the 21st century. But understand that when we read through the Old Testament, one of the things that just irked the living daylights out of God was the Jews accepted and adopted and replaced God with all of the idols of all of the nations that were surrounding them. And they basically forgot, and remember the golden calf, and the list goes on and on and on and on. This is not a surprise. It should not be a surprise to us that we see this going on in the 21st century. And then you take this statistical model that's been put out there. Why do 40% of urban Jews support Hamas? And when I say urban Jews, I'm talking about those that live in cities, that are on college campuses, that are part of college faculty, and major research facilities, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that the case, right? And it may rack your brain a little bit, but what it should tell you is the nature of the relationship of most Jews to God the Father, to the Messiah, to understanding the Messiah, to understanding what's happening in terms of time in history. But we have to be careful, because it's really easy to say, those Jews, they just don't get it. They've, and to put, to continue the sentence, they deserve every bit of the captivity they've had, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's very easy to say that, right? But we need to think through some things as it relates to this, because as we're looking at current events writ large, we need to make sure that we've got a biblical perspective on how we're approaching this. And where certain verses show up in the Bible is a strong indicator of the significance of it, because It tells you where in the chronology of God's relationship to mankind that he revealed certain things to us that should help us in comprehending what's going on. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things that are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. Now let's tear this apart for a minute. He begins by saying the secret things belong unto the Lord. What does that state? What's the key aspect of that statement? There is what? Say again, Brooke. Right. There's some things that the Lord has determined we don't need to know this side of heaven. Right? He has not told us everything. I'm just going to be candid. I mean, I've known the Lord for 50 years, and I've been reading my Bible once a year throughout the year, most of those years. And I've read it in a variety of translations, just simply because I want to, expand my comprehension and see how the words are used, etc. But every year, there's new things that come together, and new things. You say to yourself, "How did I miss that?" And so, at the end of the day, for my own self, I'm glad that the Bible's not any bigger than it is, because it's already overwhelming for me to grab a hold of and completely comprehend. So, but he said, but those things which are revealed belong to us. Okay, they're ours to have, and to our children forever. This harkens back to Deuteronomy 6. And so, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, guess what? If your kids don't know the Bible, it's on you. All right. You've got the primary responsibility to make sure that your kids are biblically literate, and by that I don't mean just they can memorize and spit back a few verses. They understand the Scripture and the tenor of the Scripture and what's going on. And then he says, that we may do all the words of this law. Now, you think about that for a second. Do all the words of this law. Have you had any trouble keeping track of and accomplishing everything that's in the Bible in terms of what you need to be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Yeah, absolutely. It's sufficient. I mean, it's enough to keep me busy for the rest of my life, and for each of you as well. And then we move to the New Testament in Matthew 24 and verse 6. It says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of war, and see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Now, here's the thing that I've heard over the years, and I've always been fascinated by this, and it wasn't until I really sat down and looked at this in the context of getting ready for this, that there was this dawning epiphany. When we hear people talk about Matthew 24:6, almost always what they say is this: "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of war." And they stop. And therein lies the problem. Because as you think about that, and then you think about and you hear about how people are responding or have been responding to what's happened since October 7th, and some people are in frantic panic mode. We had frantic panic mode in the church after 9/11, etc. And so he's making a definitive statement. You shall hear of wars and rumors of war. Definitive statement. And that shouldn't bother us. We should expect to hear about wars and rumors of war as a routine. We should expect that to be in the news. We should expect it. But then he says, "See that ye be not troubled." If the wars and rumors of war, whether it's in Gaza or Israel or Afghanistan or pick a place, gets under your skin, gets you upset, you need to back up a little bit and say, okay, God said don't be troubled about this. This is what is going to be. There will always be wars and rumors of war. For all these things must come to pass. And so there's this promise that these wars and rumors of war will have to happen, and they will have to come to pass. And then he says, but the end is not yet. Oh, the end is not yet. And I hear more rumors of war and so forth, but the end is not yet. So I shouldn't be expecting, I should not be trying to pin a pin on the calendar and say, this is the end date. No. And so So if we can grab a hold of this and say, okay, so this is where I'm at. This is what's going on. And then in Acts chapter 1 and verse 7, it says, and this is one of the few places when after the Gospels where Christ is actually speaking, and he said unto them, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons, which the Father hath put in his own power. Which is to say, the Father has laid it all out, but it's not for you to know the times or the seasons. Again, we see this being repeated for us, and that's important. Okay, so if he said it's not for you to know the times of the season, it's not for you to know the times of the season. So quit asking the question I told you not to ask, in so many words, all right? And then Paul, I love Paul because he sometimes just takes it and then he just goes, listen up, or something along that line, or hit you in the back of the head with a 2x4. He said, but of the times and seasons, brethren, so if you're reading it for the first time, you go, well, I wonder what he's going to say about this. Ye have no need that I write unto you. There is absolutely no reason for me to write anything in all the epistles about this issue of the times and seasons. And yet, how many times do you hear people, how many times in years gone by, decades gone by, all the prophecy speakers, all the prophecy individuals tell you, and you can put name after name after name after name for all of those things, and they tell you that here's the answer, the time and the season is going to be here or there. Well, Paul already made it really clear in Thessalonians, mind you, that there is no need that he write this unto you. And so as we think about this, okay, and we're talking to other people, and part of this is to understand the current events, but part of it is to understand the mindset that we need to have when we're talking to people and people are asking questions about this. You might hear someone say to you, well, you're a Christian. Don't you know what's happening? Don't you know what's going on? And the answer to the question is, well, no. All I know is this is another war that we've been promised is going to occur, and there are going to be more wars in the days ahead. And God's in control. And he said, you've got all you need. And you say that in a very kind and careful way to people. It helps them to realize that we're not losing any sleep over what's going on in current events. We're not. We shouldn't be. Now, what we may be losing sleep over is what Pastor's been teaching us over the last month or so about our relationship to the gospel and what we're conveying to the people that are around us. When we're not doing what God's told us to do, well, that ought to give us reason to lose some sleep. So as we think about this, if we are the people who are fretting about the times and the seasons, we've got to give some thought to that, okay? There ought not to be any of that in our lives right now. Are the circumstances frustrating? Yes. We learn about the Old Testament. We learn about the Chuck Schumers, if you will, of centuries ago. There were leaders in Israel who basically functioned no different than Chuck Schumer does today. And he's in allegiance with those that are not all about, the promises to Israel, etc. And so when we think about those things, we should be anticipating some things. Now, at the same time, okay, while we have this going on in our minds and in our lives, and we're confidently being able to grasp the newspaper and not be upset by it, not be letting the headlines or the news feeds or whatever else get us upset. We need to know what is actually going on in the real world so that we can explain things to people and we can have concrete reasons for what we believe. Now, back in 2016, when I did the series on Islam, this is a slide from back then with a little bit of addition to it. When we talk about Islam, this is a definition that I developed after 2001 in the Pentagon, after 9/11, to help our illiterate leaders, and I mean this, but no fault of theirs. They were a product of the education system of this country since the 1950s and 60s. And they had never heard, and they never studied history of civilization. So they were missing great, huge pieces and parts of the history of the world. And so many of them had just, it's a vague word in their background, Islam. But we never studied, for the most part, the Middle East since the early 1950s, all right? Back when they still taught the history of civilization, and they taught it globally, all right? So as we think about this, when we ask the question, well, what is Islam? I mean, what is the problem with Talib as far as we're concerned? Well, it's a comprehensive system of thought and life. Now, I'm going from big picture down to the details, which help us to comprehend what it really is all about. It's a comprehensive system of thought and life. And when I say comprehensive, it covers everything that's a part of how does a Muslim live their life in a way which is going to be pleasing and acceptable to Allah. And when I say comprehensive, I mean comprehensively comprehensive. And the next piece of it is this: it's a replacement civilization. They view the job, the purpose of every Muslim is to replace all other civilization on the planet with Islam. And there should be no other civilization functioning, existing whatsoever anywhere on the planet, not just in the Middle East, but anywhere on the planet. And until they've accomplished that, they've been disobedient to Allah. And Allah, the God of Islam, is in no way the equivalent of our God in terms of, he is a punitive, capricious entity. I won't even give him the credit of being a god, even in the general sense of it. And so when you're trying to figure out how do I survive in this civilization that I'm living in, you have to really dig in, and we'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But then it's a distinct legal system, okay? The entire legal system of Islam has no comparison, no agreement with anything that we have in terms of what we would call the Judeo-Christian legal system of the United States, or much of Western Europe, and the rest of the world, all right? And then this next word is extremely important, within which is a religion. So when you say the religion of Islam, you're talking about that very small aspect of it that deals with the half a dozen things that happen in the mosque on any given weekend, or throughout the week, for that matter. And so when you ask yourself the question, what does this really mean in terms of daily living, as it relates to a Muslim living anywhere else in the world, if their intention is to replace the civilization, which is to replace the entire legal system, which is to replace the entire set of religious options that are available to you, then you have to ask this question: can a person who is a Muslim support and defend the U.S. Constitution as it is written? Absolutely not. In fact, when you say to them, when I ask a Muslim, how can you be an American and an American citizen? And they look at you sort of crazy. I said, will you defend and support the Constitution as it's written? They get really angry very quickly, because they say, no, Allah won't let me do that. A genuine Muslim will tell you that right away. And so you ask the question, how is it possible that we have Muslims in Congress? Muslims here in positions of political responsibility, been voted into office. And so this is the upside down situation that we find ourselves living with in the United States. Then when we talk about from an Islamic perspective, Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, back in a day, back in the 40s and 50s, I think, if I remember right, it is the nature of Islam to dominate. Right? And they're very blunt about this. Not to be dominated. That is, there's nobody that's supposed to have any control, any authority over a Muslim except another Muslim. And the only belief system that is acceptable to them is that which is the belief system of Islam. And they are the ones that are to dominate. They're to dominate the government, they're to dominate civilization, they're to dominate your neighborhood. Then it's to impose its law, the Sharia, on all nations and to extend its power to the entire planet. So this is Islam. And if we don't understand that that is Islam, that's what every Muslim understands and every Muslim believes, and we think somehow or another they can be good Americans, they're only good Americans if they've achieved the objective that they have, and they've done this in some areas of the country. Go to Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example, and several other places in the country. We're up in Dearborn, Michigan, and this is exactly what is going on. The Sharia law is what controls the law and the courts in many of those areas. How did that happen? Well, it's called ignorance of human history, ignorance of civilization, and truthfully, ignorance of our Bible. And what is Christianity? And who is the God of Christianity? So, and as we try to figure out what's going on, the one thing about the Middle East and the, I'll call it the simpler cultures of humanity, is that they're very proverb-like in terms of helping themselves to understand things. So this is a tribal proverb that has an Arab aspect to it. And so when you're watching what's going on in Islam or any place most places still today in Africa or India or China for that matter, this proverb it basically lays out how does the society structure itself, all right? It says, me against my brother, me and my brother against my family, me and my family against the clan, me and my clan against the tribe, me and my tribe against the nation. And I'm going to stop there because this one is one that was added more recently when we got to the addition of nation states in terms of what's going on around the world. And when you look at this is also called the proverb of the common enemy. If my enemy is your enemy and your enemy is my enemy, then we will fight together against that common enemy, which is very important because it then explains why you have some of these linkages of entities and so forth, and why they're fighting with each other. And I mean, I'll give you the most recent example, and this is exactly why when we take a look at Hamas, we should be shaking our head and going, what's going on? Because there's an internal battle within Islam that basically says, no, Hamas should not be in agreement with and taking arms from the Sunnis because they're Shia. The same thing can be said for Hezbollah, and then you go flip it over to get to Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so forth and so on. But when the common enemy, and they view the common enemy of Islam as at the core Judeo-Christianity and the God of Christianity, the God of Christianity is the enemy of all of Islam, and so it doesn't matter whether it's you're Sunni or Shia at that point. So then it's me and my sect against the hypocrite and the apostate. Well, who is the hypocrite and the apostate? Well, they have a rank order in terms of that. The first people who are considered to be hypocrites and apostates are those individuals who are, we would call them liberal humanists, who have the approach to life that there is no God. That's the ultimate hypocrisy and apostasy. And then in it, because of the law of Islam, when you try to sort that out, all of your LGBTQ community are in the hypocrite or apostate category. And if you were to transfer those folks over to Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, they would be beheaded in 24 hours. Why? Because all of that is anathema within Islam. There are no homosexuals, known homosexuals, in Islam, in Islamic areas, because it contradicts the Quran and the whole Sharia. And then then we move it up into the geopolitical area. It says, "Me and the Ummah," which is all Muslims, against America, Israel, the West, and all infidels. Now they flip it a little bit, because the infidels piece, when they start the process of actually doing the warfare, they have a ranking order in terms of who they go after first. Now, and who they go after last. Because there's always in their mind the hope that people who have a book, and when they say people of the book, they mean people who have a Bible, or they have another religious document of sorts. There's some written documentation that they use to support their religious system. They're the ones that they deal with last, and it's all the rest of them that are taken out first, because they want to get the sin, if you will, as Islam looks at it, out of the way. So all of those people who are agnostics, apostates, etc., and moral deviants, they're the first ones to go, right? And they basically take them out, get rid of them, and say, okay, now we're going to talk to the next group, and then they go up this pecking order. And so we need to understand that this is how they think. And the fact that this is the way they think doesn't matter to what we think. And the quicker that we accept the fact that this is exactly how they're going to function, fight, and engage in geopolitical relations, the better off we're going to be. And then we have to understand this issue. When you understand Muslims and you understand Islam, this is the way they think. We love death more than you love life. And they're taught, and they use this specifically in terms of talking to the Jews and to the Christians, all right? Now, we love life in Christ, and in all of the rest of it, in some of the hymns that we were singing tonight. But you understand that there's a reason why they say we love death, because death for a Muslim is, and then how they die, and being driven to die in a certain way is at the pinnacle of their goals and objectives. Because death for a Muslim, if you die in the work of jihad, in the work of Allah, is the ultimate death, because that means that you've passed everything else, and you go to heaven without question, right? To have died doing the work of Allah means that you're given, a place in heaven, and there's nothing else that has to happen. And there's no substitution. There's nothing else along that line that goes on. And for example, there's been, and I've seen this several times here in the last several weeks. There is the illustration or the instance that, and this was evidently somebody was able to grab a hold of this phone conversation that was taking place between one of the Hamas fighters and his mother. And I double-checked it a couple of times to make sure that this wasn't just folklore. But he and I'm going to put it in I don't have the exact quotes, but he said basically, "Mom, guess what? I killed 10 Jews." And Mom said, "Praise Allah." Right? So when you that's not the way we function in the military. That's not how we think about the work that we do and the rules of war, et cetera, et cetera. And so as we wrestle with this, understand that we're dealing with an entirely different concept than anything that we would naturally know about anywhere in what's going on. And so there's the issue of what we're going to do in the future is this is the way ahead. We're not going to do this tonight, but we're going to deal with key terms, definitions, ideological frameworks, which explains why we've got some of the things that are going on in the Capitol building and other places, and who's in allegiance with who, and who's marching down the streets together, and so forth. And it goes back to that proverb. We're going to look at historical declarations, going back especially to 1914 and the Balfour Declaration, and then the UN and the other accords, modern wars in the Middle East, geopolitical events, and then religious issues that are explainable and understandable. And I'll toss one of them out that we're going to deal with, and that has to do with the issue of Roman Catholicism. Because if you do a parallel analysis of the religion of Catholicism and the religion of Islam, and you work it down from hierarchy of authorities and so forth and so on, it is remarkably identical. Because it's a work salvation and a work sanctification in Catholicism, and there's a works salvation and a work sanctification doing the right things for Allah, and the two of them work out. And it explains why Pope Benedict, the current Pope, who is he's a modern liberal in Catholic terms, and there's more to it, but he's the first Pope that ever preached a sermon on the Arabian Peninsula. And where he preached it, and the context in which he preached it, under whose authority, was very interesting, right? That's the first. And then the second aspect of it is that we need to understand that the Roman Catholic Church has been anti-Semitic almost since its inception. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's very crucial in terms of understanding a few things. So let's again, I want to walk us through a few things. Please open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 15 for a minute. And this is where you begin the process of asking some tough questions about what do I believe and what do I understand, and what pieces of folklore have I been taught, and so forth. So open up to Genesis chapter 15. And if somebody would begin reading at verse 18 and read down through verse 21, that would be very helpful. Genesis 15, 18 to 21.
In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
Okay. What book of the Bible was this written in? Recorded in? Genesis, okay? Is that important that it was written in Genesis, right? And to whom was it written? And to whom was it given? Abraham. Why is Abraham important in this discussion that we're dealing with? Okay. And Islam. That's correct. It's the Abrahamic piece with Christians is that's another story, all right? But so it's at the very beginning of the establishment of religion and the establishment of the Table of Nations and the establishment of what is going on. And so if you ask the question, what is the Promised Land? And you go, so this is where the Israel of Theodore Herzl in 1904, and that was the position of the Zionists for a long, long time, because they read their Bibles and they knew what the Promised Land was supposed to be. And Rabbi Fleischman in 47, and he was arguing at the UN that no, it's not just Palestine. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So, and by the way, for those of you that are geography fanatics, the Euphrates River has not moved. All right? It still is a very large river. It used to be a river that had delta, and it was huge. It and the Nile and the Mississippi, you know, there's a lot of comparison, and just from a river perspective. And so where you see this gray space, where you see Syria, the Euphrates River is the east boundary as it comes through the middle of Iraq and then down to the Persian Gulf. And then all the way over on the other side, you see that delta at the top where it intersects with drops into the Mediterranean Sea, and that border there is the Nile River. So if you're going to, if you listen to what's going on, eliminate the Jews from the sea to the river, and they're talking about Jordan, they don't even have it right, okay? But that's probably because the Jews don't have it right. Because this is what God said to Abraham. That's your land. So let me ask you this question in terms of human history. When in human history have the Jews actually populated that entire landmass area? Never. Right? And that's significant, okay? So from the very beginning, all the way back in Genesis 15, there's an aspect of this covenant that God had laid down with Abraham that they've never fulfilled. And that's been characteristic of Israel with all of the covenants and all of the aspects of the covenants for all of human history. Now, I got a second map over here, and this is the 12 maps of the map of the 12 tribes in 1400 BC. And you can, if you blow this one up, you can actually see where, you know, all the tribes are, the 12 tribes, and they barely, except for, you know, a couple of the tribes that said, look, I'm tired of traveling, let me stay on this side of the Jordan, right? Right? Remember that? And so, but why? Was that covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15 abrogated? No. Well, why did they just stop at the Jordan? Or why did God allow them to stop? Because He knew better that they weren't going to go any further, and they would be lucky if they actually conquered all of what was called the Promised Land at that point, and they never did. They always left a remnant of the pagans, etc. There. Now, when we move forward into the day and age in which we live now, this is a very, very fascinating map, and here's where we're going to have to start to deal with names and terms and terminology. It says Palestinian loss of land 1946 to the present. So let's try to figure this out, all right? What is Palestine, all right? Let's approach this from an American perspective, all right? So in the United States, we have this place called Appalachia. All right? Where is Appalachia? South of here, all right? It's the area around the Appalachian Mountains, right? If you live in Appalachia, are you an Appalachian? No. You're probably a citizen of what? West Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, right? But in that context, you're also a what? An American, okay? But take it a step further. The people who live in Appalachia are also often, just like we are here, are often what else? Some of them were Germans, some of them were Poles, some of them were Brits, Scots, Irish. They have an ethnicity. They have a national history, an ethnic history, all right? Now, the closest we can come to this as it relates to this aspect of things is that the people who live in Appalachia, I guess their ethnicity is hillbilly. All right? But the reason why I'm trying to make this illustration is that when we talk about Palestine, Appalachia and Palestine are identical in the key aspects of terminology. They are both just geographic areas. They're geographic areas that you can put on the map, and you can trace the history of the geography. You can take this all the way back to almost the earliest of history, and then all of a sudden you get the word Palestine starts to become a part of the geography that's associated with war and the conquering of areas. And so at the same time, when we go back to this and you look down in the south of this and you look at some of the other maps, you have, and then we looked to Genesis chapter 15, all of those ites, those are the people groups. And there are people groups that lived in this area of Palestine that aren't even listed in Genesis 15, but they're in the table of nations and other things. And so when you hear somebody use the word Palestinian, that should throw red flags, because there is no such thing as an ethnic group called Palestinian. And this is why this article is going to become important. Although I'm going to go back to the editor and I'm going to talk to him about this because of the way they even used it in World Magazine, and they're generally pretty solid about some of this stuff. So by the time we get to the 1940s, and this time of the year, this time of history rather, there were basically nobody living along this part. It was basically fishing villages here and there, right? And it wasn't until we get to 1946, 1947 that we begin to see this massive change in terms of the population group. And when you look at some of the accords that took place in the 20th century, there was huge migrations. The Jews basically Israel basically, bust all the Jews from Gaza to the rest of Israel, so that Gaza could become just Arab. And we'll talk about in the future this issue of Arab and Israel, Arab and Jew. And so when you ask yourself what is a Palestinian, the answer to the question is this: either a Jew or an Arab who has chosen to live in the land of Palestine. So you could say, I'm an Arab Palestinian, or I'm a Jewish Palestinian, but to say I am a Palestinian is totally inaccurate. And it's a political term, it's a propaganda term that has originated in the 20th century for purposes. And so when we ask the question, why does it matter? Well, we'll cover that next week. But it's crucial. If we don't get this kind of stuff straight, we don't understand the nature of the conflict, and we don't understand where it's going and why it's going the way it's going, and what's happened in the past. And hopefully I'll have this for you next week. So with that, I'm going to stop, and Pastor, I guess,